Hey. I hope you're all doing well. I was just listening to a woman talk about something that 15 years ago would have sent me reeling. And she was talking about holding yourself accountable for your part of things in a relationship, even if the person's behavior was harmful and hurtful. And I had a really good friend back in the day who asked me some really hard questions and lovingly put me in my place because I was stuck in a lot of blame when it came to my ex-husband. And although there was a very, very good reason for that, what my friend was doing was actually mimicking Al-Anon principles. I remember going to Al-Anon and I loved the meetings with the elders, the much older women, because I call them like the wisdom keepers. And I just trusted them implicitly. I knew they had been through it and they knew their shit. And I remember them saying to me, focus on you. Well, what are you doing to get yourself better? What are you doing to fix you? And it would piss me off because I just wanted somebody to tell me that I was right and how horrible of a person he was and that, what he was doing was wrong. I wanted validation. And while that's very important, what they were doing was giving me tools to kind of excavate the victimization that I was stuck in. And I was a full participant in that. And to admit that and have to take responsibility for that was really hard. It is really hard. It's almost kind of embarrassing to say this out loud, but I think it's really necessary because I have been in conversation with other women. And when I say this, I can see it, that reaction that, wait a second, you're victim blaming. And that's not what's happening. When you come out of a cycle of abuse, it's very important that you receive validation, that you are seen and fully heard, and you can express yourself. And it's actually really important to rage, especially for women. And we know that women have the highest rates of abuse, domestic violence, etc. I'm not saying men don't endure this. I'm just saying, statistically speaking, it's a much higher rate with women being the victim. And so what was happening was I was doing all of that and I was finding people who were hearing me and they were validating me, but I was staying there, which being, when I was in the mental health field and I was in clinical settings, I would see this all the time when I was running group process. I was a smart recovery facilitator in a intensive outpatient program for co-occurring disorders. So almost all of them were alcoholics. And then they also had another drug of choice. And then they had a mental health diagnosis. And over and over again, they would repeat the same stories. They were just stuck in this repetitive cycle of woe is me and victimization, which is very common in the addiction field and very common when you've incurred any type of abuse. So I'm very grateful to that friend. I wasn't at the time, but I hold her in high esteem because she was the only person in my life who had the courage to be like, enough, cut your shit, and start asking yourself really hard questions, which was, why did I attract him? What was so alluring about his personality? I have a theory. And again, this rubs people the wrong way. Most people tell you who they are up front. When I look back to all of the times that a guy has mistreated me in a relationship or cheated, that was pretty obvious from the beginning. People usually tell you who they are and you choose to ignore it. I was also very attracted to undisciplined, wild bad boys. That was a bit of an imprint. I also came from a long line of extremely strong women. My grandmother was one of 15. 13 were women. 13 of the 15 were women. She was the 8th and the last one born overseas in Limerick. And they had really strong personalities, and they were really strong women. And a lot of them, when I looked at the ancestry, attracted men that needed rehabilitation. Like there was a lot of rescue syndrome. And a revelation that I had was that there's a lot of superiority that comes with that again is really hard to admit out loud. I wasn't attracting men at a higher level because that was intimidating. It made me feel insecure. It was much safer for me to be with somebody who, not consciously, because when I look back, these were not conscious decisions, but subconsciously, I was attracting men that I felt superior to. And they needed help. And I was going to kiss all their boo-boos and I was going to make it better. And so I had to be really honest with myself that, number one, it was an imprint. It was generational. There were a lot of women attracting men that had serious cycles of addiction. A lot of women in my family lineage were in abusive relationships. And number two, what comes along with that is a lack of self-esteem and a lack of self-worth. And that's on me. So part of getting out of victimization for a woman who has come out of really horrible circumstances, like my ex-husband has very redeeming qualities. My girls and I talk about this all the time. I can say very kind and nice things about my ex-husband. He was a bit brutal. He did not make things easy. Addiction does not put somebody in their right mind, right? So they say hate the addiction, not the person. I actually know that my ex-husband is a wonderful person deep down inside that's very clouded by specific things. And I understand that, and I actually have compassion for it. But our compassion can be weaponized, and we need to have a lot of discretion and boundaries about these things. So there had to be a separation, a distance in energy, and how much I gave to the partnership even post-divorce, because you're still in partnership because you're raising kids together. Now we're very removed from that, having girls that are young adults. But I can tell you that I went from like visceral hatred. I remember talking, I think it was after a yoga class. I either took a yoga class at the studio where I was certified or I taught. And something came up about my ex-husband. And they said, look down at your fists. And my fists were like this at my sides as I was talking about him, because I had visceral hatred and anger. And it took years to work through that because we were still raising kids together and things were extremely challenging. Once I started to hold myself accountable and take responsibility for my decisions, and this is not to demonize my ex-husband or have anyone think ill of him. This is a very real world example. My story is not unique to an extent. A lot of men and women that I've talked to have been through a similar cycle. But my ex-husband was rooted in addiction. And I consciously started to date a guy who was wrapped up in court cases and like potentially could have went to jail. And now I'm pregnant and I'm taking him to alcohol and addiction counseling sessions, and I'm driving him to AA meetings because he had no driver's license. I call this version of Carrie young and dumb. I was in my early 20s. I was rebelling. The more my parents told me that I couldn't date him, and said no, the more I rebelled. Young and dumb. If I had any sense of self-worth, self-esteem, self-respect, if things were role modeled a little bit better for me, I probably would have chose differently. Now, I don't blame my mother for that. I don't blame my ancestry for that. I'm glad that the spell has been broken, and I'm proud of the amount of awareness that I've cultivated throughout this process. But I definitely continued to victimize myself by making him the bad guy, making me the good guy. And it's a hard pill to swallow, it really is. And so I'm being so candid about this because if you are in that cycle, I promise you, the more you stay in the loop and the more you talk about that person and their behavior and what they did and what they said and look how bad they are, it's going to be very hard for you to elevate, to grow, to really create a new reality for yourself, because that is in essence what happened when I said, you know what, my friend is right. I stopped dating. I dove into celibacy. I didn't want to be a man's project. I didn't want to rope a man into the craziness of my life. It wasn't fair. I wasn't fully present. I wasn't fully matured. I wasn't over all of the hurt and the pain. And I'm not knocking anybody who seeks out partnership, because I think you can heal those wounds through partnership. That's a me thing. That's just how I function. I didn't want anybody else drowning because I was drowning. I want to bring my best self to the table. I want to bring 150% of myself to everything that I do. I've always functioned that way. I'm not really interested in half-assing anything, especially not a partnership. That's a very big decision in your life, who you decide to move through, life with. That's a big deal. It's a really big deal. I never thought of it that way. No one spoke to me like this. Nobody sat me down and said, this is the most important decision you're ever going to make, and here is why. My parents functioned from that very traditional, old school model. And a lot of it was do as I say, don't do as I do, which is like terrible parenting, but a lot of us grew up with that. I don't blame them at all. Every generation has a specific consciousness. They didn't have the tools. And they truly did the best that they could. So that's all good. But once I realized that I truly was the deciding factor of staying where I was or propelling myself to a different place, I cried a lot. I cried for the girl who didn't really think much of herself and thought that that's the best that she could do and that's what she deserved. I cried for my kids and the struggles that they endured because of the choices that I made. Although I feel like God is in charge and everything happens for a reason, I definitively could have chose differently. I didn't have to pick that type of partner. Again, he's not a demon. But when people are stuck in cycles that affect their neurobiology and their physiology and their executive functioning, he wasn't acting and behaving and moving from a place that was mature. There was a lack of emotional intelligence. And I chose that. And I had to suffer the natural consequences of that. Victimization is real. We're all victimized. And I could tell you as a single parent, we do, to an extent, become a victim of the system, because the system is not set up to be extremely supportive of single parents. I mean, the process nearly killed me at one point. Truly, it was one of the most challenging periods of my life. But staying a victim is a choice. Hearing that is really hard. Hearing that you are in the driver's seat and you're the captain of your ship and you are one decision away from changing everything is a really hard pill to swallow. And that cannot happen without appropriate support, because everybody needs a safety net. So I did a ton of therapy, and I did EMDR, and I did body work, and I worked with a shaman, and I worked with multiple healers, and I worked out all the time, and I did a ton of yoga and breathing, and I did, cold shower therapy. Like, you name it, I was doing it. Herbs for my nervous system. All of that was wonderful, but it wasn't until I realized that what my friend was saying was true, and that I played a very big part in everything that happened with my ex-husband. That was the defining factor in me getting well, being a better mother for my kids, feeling stronger, and really empowered. It was really empowering after the initial breakdown of the realization that I was also a culprit in the whole drama and saga of that dynamic. I know that's really hard to hear. I hope that this helps somebody out there, because although things of this nature make us feel really crappy inside, I promise you, and I know I say this a lot in my videos, but it's really true, there is something spectacular on the other side of it. And the other things that I would recommend, especially if you're a woman, is Women Who Run with the Wolves. That book saved me. I've read it 3 times over during that whole period. I just kept revisiting it. And Melanie Beatty, her books on codependency were fantastic. So that self-help, that professional development, all of that, that personal development, all of it helped me become a more fully functioning human being. And that type of accountability is going to be your saving grace. Also, a lot of prayer and gratitude for what you do have and the things that are working, and who is showing up for you, and who is supporting you, and what is going right. I hope that helps, loves. Have a great day.